The weak morning sun struggled to pierce the heavy clouds as the military convoy arrived at the abandoned Air Force base now known as Eagles Peak. The place exuded melancholy, rusting metal hangars, runways ravaged by time, and wild vegetation reclaiming its territory. For 10 long years, the base had been eerily silent, a ghost of its former self, once the vibrant heart of the nation's air power. General Robert Hayes stepped out of the official limousine, chest puffed out, with the air of superiority that had become his trademark. At 52, he represented the new generation of military commanders, ambitious, pragmatic, and utterly disconnected from the glorious past of the Air Force. To him, Eagles Peak was simply valuable real estate ripe for development into shopping malls or luxury condos. "Members of the press," he began, adjusting his military cap as he walked toward the main hangar, "we are here to once and for all debunk the absurd legends surrounding this place. The locals insist on believing fairy tales about miraculous planes and forgotten heroes. It's time to separate fantasy from reality." A small group of onlookers huddled near the base gates. Residents of the nearby town, local journalists, and a few retired veterans still clinging to memories of the Golden Age. Among them, almost imperceptible, was Clara Miller. She was 34, but looked older, her hands calloused from hard work, her hair prematurely grayed, pulled back in a simple bun. She wore a coffee-stained apron over a faded white blouse and a dark skirt that had seen better days. To any casual observer, she was just another humble worker, the owner of the corner cafe, where she served coffee and pastries to retirees and public servants. General Hayes positioned himself in front of the hangar, housing the legendary F-39, nicknamed the Alpha 9. The fighter jet sat there, immobile, under a dusty tarp, like a sleeping giant. Its aerodynamic lines were still impressive, even after a decade of neglect. "Observe," the general continued, his voice echoing through the empty hangar. "This plane is the perfect symbol of the romanticized past that plagues our society. People prefer to live in legends rather than face reality. They say the Alpha 9 was special, that it performed impossible maneuvers, that it participated in top-secret missions. Pure fantasy. The truth is, this piece of junk had a catastrophic accident that cost lives and never flew again. It's dead, just like the era it represents." An uncomfortable murmur rippled through the small crowd. Some veterans hung their heads, embarrassed. The general noticed the impact of his words and decided to deepen the humiliation. "But you know what amuses me about this whole story? Your unwavering belief that miracles can happen, that someone, magically, could bring this dinosaur back to life. Well, I make a public offer. If anyone can get this plane working again, I will publicly admit I was wrong. More than that, I commit to transforming Eagles Peak into a permanent memorial to military aviation." The silence that followed was awkward. Reporters exchanged glances, some smiling subtly at the obvious provocation. It was impossible. Even the most qualified engineers hadn't been able to revive the machine. Then, a soft but firm female voice cut through the heavy air of the hangar. "I accept the challenge." All heads turned toward the sound. Clara stepped forward, emerging from the shadows where she had remained until then. The general looked her up and down with an expression that mixed surprise and disdain. "Excuse me, ma'am?" Clara Miller. "And what exactly are your qualifications to mess with a military fighter jet, Ms. Miller?" The question was asked in a deliberately condescending tone, eliciting muffled laughter from some of those present. Clara maintained her composure, her brown eyes shining with a determination that contrasted with her modest appearance. "I grew up here, General. My father worked at this base for 25 years. "Ah, I understand," Fuentes replied sarcastically. "So you're a soldier's daughter. That certainly qualifies you to perform miracles of aeronautical engineering, doesn't it?" More laughter. Some cameras were already turning to record that embarrassing moment. A simple woman, obviously out of her league, offering to take on an impossible challenge? It was the kind of situation that would become a meme on social media in a matter of hours. Clara, however, showed no sign of intimidation. On the contrary, something in her posture transformed. She raised her chin slightly and said, "My father wasn't a soldier, General. He was Master Sergeant John Miller, chief mechanic of this base. And I didn't come here to perform miracles. I came here to do my job." The mention of the name John Miller caused a sudden silence among the veterans. Some looked at each other, recognizing the reference. The general, however, didn't seem impressed. "Very well, Ms. Miller. If you're so confident, I won't stop you from publicly humiliating yourself. But I set some conditions. You will have 72 hours to do what you think you can do. No technical assistance, no new parts, no specialized equipment. Use only what you find here at the base. And, obviously, everything will be documented so there's no doubt about the result." Clara nodded calmly. "I accept." The general smiled predatorily. "Excellent. Let the show begin." As the reporters positioned themselves and the cameras began to capture every movement, Clara headed out of the hangar. She needed a few things from home before starting work. The crowd gradually dispersed, some commenting on the woman's courage, others on her obvious naivete. An hour later, Clara returned carrying an old, faded blue metal toolbox and a brown leather-bound notebook so worn it looked about to fall apart. These were the only things she'd brought from home, besides a thermos of coffee and some sandwiches wrapped in foil. Her hands moved with surprising precision, as if she knew every component of this complex machine. When reporters asked about her progress, she responded with polite monosyllables, maintaining absolute concentration on the task. As the hours passed, small details began to attract the attention of more observant onlookers. Clara didn't consult manuals or official diagrams. She relied exclusively on the notes in the notebook. Even more impressive, she seemed to know exactly where to find replacement parts in the abandoned base depot, as if she had a mental map of the place. That night, when she was alone in the hangar, the reporters and curious onlookers had left. Clara allowed herself a moment of remembrance. She closed her eyes and could almost hear her father's voice echoing in that space. "Clarita, this here is the heart of the Alpha 9. See this valve? If it jams, the entire fuel system is compromised. But there's a trick. You can make a bypass using this cable here, connecting directly to the auxiliary pump. The engineers never figured this out because it's outside the official manual." John Miller had been more than a mechanic. He was one of those men born with the gift of understanding machines, of listening to them, of feeling them. For 25 years, he had cared for the planes at Eagles Peak as if they were his children. And the Alpha 9 was his favorite, a temperamental, complex machine, but capable of extraordinary performances in the right hands. Clara had literally grown up among airplanes. While other children played with dolls or cars, she held flashlights for her father during night repairs, organized tools by size and function, and memorized component codes. John never had a son, but he found in Clara a genuine heir to his knowledge. Everything changed on a single night in March, 15 years ago. The accident. Clara still remembered the shrill siren that had awakened the entire base at 2 in the morning. The Alpha 9 had suffered a malfunction during a nighttime test flight. The pilot had managed to eject in time, but the aircraft had crashed in a wooded area near the runway. It took hours to bring the fire under control. The official investigation concluded that there had been multiple failures in the electronic systems, a supposedly impossible event due to safety redundancies. But John Miller knew the truth. He had discovered evidence of sabotage in the components recovered from the wreckage. Someone had deliberately altered the onboard computer programming, causing the accident. When he tried to present his findings, John was discredited, transferred to administrative duties, and eventually forced into early retirement. The stress of injustice destroyed his health. He died 3 years later, bitter and forgotten, taking the truth about the Alpha 9 with him. Clara inherited not only his technical knowledge, but also his thirst for justice. For years, she silently cultivated the dream of one day proving her father's innocence and honoring his memory. General Hayes's challenge was the opportunity she had been waiting for. The second day brought more visible progress. Clara began replacing damaged components, soldering broken connections, and cleaning systems clogged by years of neglect. Her movements were economical and precise. Every gesture demonstrated profound knowledge of the machine. Reporters noticed that a small virtual crowd was forming on social media. Someone had posted a video of the woman working alone in the hangar, accompanied by the caption, "A simple woman versus military arrogance." The video quickly went viral, accumulating millions of views and supportive comments from people around the world. At this point, dear reader, I ask you to pause for a second and reflect on this story. How many times have we underestimated someone because of their appearance or origin? How many times have we failed to believe in miracles because it seems too impossible? If this narrative is touching your heart, if you are feeling the same emotion that I feel telling this story, be a part of this community. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell. Let's together discover more stories of extraordinary people that the world tried to diminish, because believing in miracles is the first step to achieving them. And now, let's return to the hangar where Clara continued her silent battle against the impossible. The third day dawned with rain. The sound of the drops on the metal roof of the hangar created a melancholy symphony that accompanied Clara during the most crucial hours of her work. It was time to test the main electrical systems. She had spent the night reconfiguring the onboard computers, using codes she had found in her father's notebook, sequences that were not in any official manual. They were the tricks that John had developed over years of practical experience, creative solutions to problems that the engineers didn't even know existed. When she turned on the first system, the panel lights flickered weakly. Minimal progress, but significant. Clara smiled for the first time in 3 days. She was on the right track. In the afternoon, a small crowd gathered again in the hangar. The story had gone national, and several television crews had arrived to cover the outcome. General Hayes arrived, accompanied by other high-ranking military officers, clearly irritated by the attention the case was receiving. "Well, Mrs. Clara Miller," he said with barely concealed sarcasm, "your 72 hours are almost up. How's the progress of your miracle coming along?" Clara didn't look up from the panel she was adjusting. "It'll work." "It'll work? Are you sure about that?" "I am." The unwavering confidence in her voice made some present exchange glances. There was something different about this woman. Clara opened her notebook to a specific page and showed it to the nearest camera. "Here's the evidence my father collected. Altered codes, sabotaged components, falsified reports. Everything documented with the precision of a man who dedicated his entire life to these machines. The tension in the hangar was palpable. Reporters moved closer, filming the notebook pages that revealed complex diagrams and detailed notes on technical inconsistencies. And do you know what the goal of the sabotage was? Clara closed the notebook and looked the general directly in the eye. Someone wanted Eagles Peak shut down. They wanted this base sold to real estate speculators. They wanted history and tradition erased in the name of profit. General Hayes visibly paled. Some of the officers accompanying him exchanged nervous glances. "You're making very serious accusations without any concrete proof." "The proof is here," Clara tapped lightly on the notebook. "And the greatest proof of all will be when the Alpha 9 flies again. Because my father taught me not only how to fix this machine, but how to make it surpass its original limitations." Clara turned to the plane and began the final procedures. Her hands worked with impressive speed and precision, as if executing a choreography rehearsed for decades. She connected cables, adjusted valves, calibrated sensors. The hangar was absolutely silent, except for the sound of tools and equipment. Even the reporters stopped asking questions, hypnotized by the intensity of the moment. Finally, Clara went to the cockpit. She adjusted the seat, checked the controls, and took a deep breath. For a moment, she closed her eyes and could feel her father's presence beside her. "Go ahead, Clarita. Show them what you're capable of." She turned the main ignition key. Nothing happened. The ensuing silence was deafening. Some people in the crowd sighed, others shook their heads in pity. General Hayes couldn't hide a satisfied smile. "Well, Miss Clara Miller, it seems that faith isn't always enough to—" But then a sound cut him off. A metallic click from deep within the machine, followed by another and another. Clara remained calm in the cockpit, her hands moving over the controls with surgical precision. She activated the secondary ignition sequence, the secret procedure her father had developed and which had never been included in the official manuals. An electronic hiss began to emerge from the plane's speakers. Then a deeper rumble, as if something gigantic were awakening from a long sleep. And then it happened. With a roar that shook the entire hangar, the Alpha 9's engines roared to life. The noise was deafening, but at the same time majestic, the sound of victory over the impossible. The panel lights lit up one by one, creating a spectacle of colors reflected in the tears streaming down Clara's face. The navigation systems emitted confirmation beeps, the onboard computers ran their self-test routines, and the control surfaces moved smoothly in response to commands. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers of jubilation. People who didn't know each other embraced, veterans wept openly, reporters narrated the miracle to their cameras with voices choked with emotion. But the most impressive was yet to come. Clara adjusted some controls, and the engines responded with power that exceeded even the machine's original specifications. The Alpha 9 didn't just work, it worked better than ever. She stepped out of the cockpit and was immediately surrounded by the enthusiastic crowd. Flashes of cameras, extended microphones, questions shouted simultaneously. But Clara kept her gaze fixed on General Hayes, who remained paralyzed in the middle of the hangar. "General," she said, her voice still audible despite the noise of the engines, "you promised something if I managed to get the plane working." Hayes swallowed hard. The cameras turned to him, awaiting his reaction. He was cornered, surrounded by witnesses, and his own publicly given word. Yes, I said I would publicly acknowledge if you managed to." "I don't just want your acknowledgement," Clara interrupted. "I want you to investigate what really happened 15 years ago. I want my father's name cleared, and I want Eagles Peak transformed into the memorial this base deserves to be." The general looked around, seeing the expectation in people's faces, feeling the weight of the situation. Some of the officers accompanying him whispered amongst themselves, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Miller," he said finally, his voice losing all its previous arrogance, we will investigate everything you're alleging. If there's evidence of past irregularities, they will be duly investigated." And Eagles Peak? Eagles Peak will become a permanent memorial to military aviation, as I promised. Clara nodded, satisfied. But there was something more that needed to be said. "General, I could use this victory to humiliate you in the same way you tried to humiliate me. I could demand your head. I could make you the villain of this story. But I won't do that." She paused, organizing her thoughts. "My father taught me that true strength isn't in revenge, but in justice. It's not in destroying others, but in building something better. You acted out of ignorance, not malice, and ignorance can be cured with knowledge and humility." Clara's speech echoed through the silent hangar. Even the engines of the Alpha 9 seemed to have decreased in intensity, as if the machine itself were listening to her words. "I accept your apologies in advance," she continued, "and I hope this experience teaches you to never underestimate the power of dreams and determination. There are extraordinary people everywhere, sometimes serving coffee on a street corner, sometimes sweeping streets, sometimes tending gardens. Greatness isn't in titles or positions, but in the heart of those who refuse to give up." General Hayes lowered his head, genuinely ashamed. When he raised it again, there were tears in his eyes. "You're right, Mr. Miller. I behaved arrogantly and prejudicially. I publicly apologize, and I promise I will do everything in my power to honor the commitments I made today." Clara smiled for the second time in 3 days. "Thank you, General. This is how you build a better world." In the days that followed, Clara's story spread around the world. She was in Eagles Peak was transformed into the John Miller Military Aviation Memorial in honor of the mechanic who dedicated his life to those flying machines. The Alpha 9, completely restored by Clara, became the centerpiece of the exhibition. And on its gleaming fuselage, in golden letters, was painted the phrase Clara left as a legacy: "Those who say something is dead have never heard the heart of someone who believes." But perhaps the most important thing of all was the transformation of General Hayes. He became a passionate advocate for the preservation of military memory and began to regularly visit Clara's cafe, not as a superior officer, but as a friend and admirer of her wisdom. Clara, in turn, never abandoned her corner cafe. She continued serving coffee and pastries to retirees and public servants, but now her conversations included stories about airplanes, dreams, and the importance of never giving up on what you believe in. Sometimes, when the wind blew in the right direction, the townspeople could hear the distant roar of the Alpha 9 on its demonstration flights at the memorial. It was a sound that spoke of memory, justice, and victory. It was the sound of a heart that never stopped believing. And perhaps, dear reader, that is the most powerful lesson of this story. In a world that constantly tells us we must accept limitations, that we must conform to mediocrity, that we must bow our heads before arrogant authority, there are still people like Clara Miller. People who carry within them the legacy of dreamers, the wisdom of the wronged, the strength of those who refuse to be silenced. People who prove day after day that miracles are not supernatural events. They are the natural result of the combination of knowledge, determination, and unwavering faith. The next time someone says something is impossible, remember the Alpha 9. Remember Clara. Remember that some hearts are too strong to accept defeat. And who knows? Maybe you'll be the next person to make the impossible roar again.